Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming to the presentation. I'm going to take you to a place about we all be familiar with in terms of recycling. We all do it at home, but do you really understand where the material goes that you put in your bin? And invariably, what we put in our bin, we like to wish that it ends up back in the circular economy. I'm afraid to say that currently that is not the case. But the opportunity that advanced recycling is now bringing enables us to really recapture a lot of the lost plastic. And so our ambition essentially is to become the world's leading producer of premium oils that goes back around the circular economy, but also at low carbon, and try and keep that plastic material in circulation for as long as possible. So this is the lie that we were all told. I spent 6 years working in an NGO called Plastic Oceans, and it was really extraordinary to understand really the psychology of what happened to us all in the 50s and 60s and 70s and beyond, that plastic was this magic material that we could just throw away and not worry about. And of course, that was driven by a growing population and consumption, obviously increasing standards on things like food hygiene and so on. But invariably, that led to huge wastage. Of course, in the 80s and 90s and onwards, recycling of plastic really became more prevalent. But a lot of the plastic that we do use is not achieving that recycling aim. So I would like to say it's partly our fault because we've been taught to do this, but we need to relearn. And the opportunity is that we can relearn very quickly and bring new technologies to scale to help us do this. And it's not just about the material, it's also about how we do this at low carbon. So here's some stats. You'll be familiar with some of these. So on average, only about 9% of global plastic is recycled. 9%. UK is about 50%. European Union is about 60%. But the United States, it's below 10. Globally, it's very, very low. And it's either being sent to landfill or being sent to energy from waste incineration. We have an example on here. You probably can't see it at the back. But only 15% of the fuel that goes into incineration is actually plastic. But it accounts for 70% of the emissions from that plant. And that carbon intensity is really important to hang on to that number. And that means that one company in this country is throwing out 1.5 million tons of CO2 from the plastic content of its refuse-derived fuel alone. We know about 8 million tons is going in the ocean. Actually, it's not that. It's between 4 and 12, so it's potentially and growing. But also the value of the material itself in the industry is colossal. We're talking many billions of pounds. And also a lot is being lost every year. 120 billion is lost every year in value. So we need to do something different. So what Mura is trying to do is to take advanced recycling to scale. And advanced recycling, what we're looking at here is a range of technologies. I'll talk about our technology, but essentially we're talking about technologies that somehow either deconstruct or depolymerize the plastic waste back into a feedstock that goes back around the value chain. We're trying to do that with our technology. So it's about circularity. We are also trying to do this on a global scale. So we have a build-out partner in KBR. So this is the overview slide, but I'll come to the detail. It's also about being strategic. This is not going to be a short game. We know that we've got to do this over the long term. We've got to change the way we do things at massive scale. We're talking about millions of tons of plastic waste in this country going to incineration every year. We want to change that round. And the way we want to do that is to build strategic partnerships across the value chain, but also find investors that are looking for low carbon investments, because we believe this is a proposition that will deliver significant low carbon returns over many years. And also, as I mentioned, at the carbon side of things, it's about keeping that resource in circulation so that we're reducing the amount of oil that comes out of the ground. So where does chemical recycling fit in? So we're the blue lozenge in this diagram, and in effect that's a linear value chain, the sort of the produce, use and throw away linear economy we've all lived with. What we're trying to do is join up the disparate ends, just join up the waste and the chemicals industry. Chemicals industry tends not to take waste for a variety of regulatory reasons. So the chemical industry has largely been dependent on taking fossil material out of the ground and putting it in the value chain. Some is recycled mechanically, as I say, some of it's in some countries that's very high. But the important thing is here that we're trying to avoid going into the environment energy from waste, but also we don't want to make a fuel. If you make a fuel, it just basically that carbon ends up in the environment again. So what we're trying to do here is keep material in a circular economy. My penultimate slide will talk about how you do that on an economic basis. So just hold that thought. How do you join up two ends of a linear economy is a major challenge. But we also do this through, we have to certify this, and there's some work going on right now about how you work out how much material flow is going around the system, but you need to verify this. This is potentially, there are many traps on greenwashing in all this, and we need to be very careful of that too. I'll just talk through the process. Amongst the technologies that are available in chemical recycling or advanced recycling, the majority are focusing on something called pyrolysis or thermal technologies. We are similar to pyrolysis in that we're putting energy into the system, but the means of change is somewhat different. Our technology is based on something called water. Now, I think you've all heard of that. And we've been boiling water for about 250 years, so we've kind of got to handle this. But it's water under supercritical conditions. So we're talking very high temperature, so over 430 degrees centigrade, and at 300 bar. And in those reaction conditions, we are able to crack the polymeric material that's in plastic, and I'll talk about feedstock in a moment, back into short chain hydrocarbons. So the process broadly starts with we receive waste plastic. That waste plastic is cleaned but not washed. So we're taking out all the material we don't want to go in our process. So things like metals and wood and paper and card that are sadly still commingled with the bales that we will be able to receive. We put that through our extruder where it's heated and pressurized and mixed with supercritical water, and it's then heated and put through our hydro PRS reactor. Because we're at high pressure, we're able to use that pressure at the end of the process, so we depressurize, and that allows us to flash distill not a mixed oil, but separate fractions. And those separate fractions have different properties based on boiling points, and obviously they end up as different products. The value of water means that you are a very efficient process. When heat is applied, you're heating the water and not the plastic, which is traditional with pyrolysis. That means you're not creating a char or a waste material, and therefore our yield is higher. We're putting in less energy into the system as well. So we have very high conversion efficiencies, certainly in the very high 80s, and it could be as high as low 90s, depending on the reactor. We can scale the reactors. We want to get to scale. We want to solve this problem, and our reactors are at 20 and 50,000 ton design output. So we want to create plants that are able to make a difference in the local value chain. We can take different plastics, and we're tolerant to different types of plastics in the same mix going in. And that's important because when you do about waste streams, they're all commingled. How do you deal with that? We're also able to deal with plastic that's contaminated. So, for example, with food waste, because it's a wet process, that material effectively comes off in the water. The inorganic fraction goes to water. So we end up with very clean oils. Sorts of materials that we're looking to see. It's the stuff that we can't recycle right now. The stuff you wish could be recycled but actually isn't. This is the films and flexibles that will be, like packaging for food in particular. We're looking at polyolefins, so polyethylene and polypropylene material, but we're tolerant also to polystyrene and PET, like PET film that will be around some food packaging. But basically, it's the end-of-life consumer plastics. We would take industrial plastics as well, as long as it was from the right source. So agricultural and mechanical recycling facility waste, obviously, but also potentially anaerobic digestion. The whole point of this is that we're trying to find a solution that complements the existing mechanical waste infrastructure. So we are additive and not taking away from, but we're diverting away from energy from waste. And this is what we make. So we convert that waste plastic into a range of hydrocarbons. From the top row is kind of the lighter fractions, so naphthas and distillate gas oils, through to the heavier fractions. The far right hand on the lower run there, plastic is not just about polymer. It will contain a lot of other materials like colorants and fillers. 30% of plastic packaging, particularly flexibles, will be chalk. So that material has to go somewhere. So the heavy wax residue is where all that material ends up. And what that means is that we end up with clean oils, which can then go back around the plastics value chain. But the heavy wax residue is a product in its own right, and effectively is a bitumen binder. So that will go into road making. So we're talking about decarbonising road making as well. And it's all about the chemistry. You can't just make the one product you would like. You end up with a range of products based on the reaction. So from the output that we make, I've already mentioned the fact that stuff goes to the bitumen industry, so that's a product in its own right. But the output is pretty clean, but we will put it through a hydrotreatment process to basically remove inorganics, things like chlorides, oxygenates, nitrogen. That's a polishing step, really. We're not doing with toxicants. It's material that is undesirable in the plastics downstream. And that's the sort of the lower boiling point material. So again, this material is going back around the plastic value chain, and our off-takers are putting it into packaging like polyethylene and polypropylene. Okay, so let's get to the question of, well, so what? What's the cost of this from the environmental point of view? And it's pretty important that we think about not just circularity, but also sustainability. If we just, if we did this at any cost, we'd actually make things worse from an environmental point of view. So by diverting plastic away from energy from waste, we're having a net saving around 1.8 tons of CO2 per ton of plastic we process. That's so-called the counterfactual argument. Now, that's a saving that doesn't end up in scope 3 value chain of the products, but it's a kind of a gift that keeps on giving back to the planet. So if we're diverting plastic away from energy from waste, we are saving potentially millions of tons of CO2 that is utterly avoidable. So that's our process. You want me to read this at the back, so I'll help you here. But broadly speaking, we're involved with a whole range of independent life cycle assessments. The most recent one came from the Joint Research Centre in the EU. We were found to be 50% lower than the carbon intensity of equivalent technologies called pyrolysis. And we were seen as the most circular of the technologies in their assessment, even compared to mechanical recycling. But think about it, every ton of plastic we process, we're also avoiding 5 tons of oil coming out of the ground. So we're keeping this material in circulation, we're displacing fossil oil coming out of the ground. And in terms of the products, the first plant that we're building at the moment in Wilton, the first commercial scale demonstrator, will be generating our oils at or below the current fossil equivalents available, so fossil naphtha and so on. But with the plants that we're now also in development in Cascade, in the Pacific Northwest in the States, and also in Berlin, we'll be doing process gas recycling, and we'll also be taking renewable energy. And that means our products will be 20% CO2 or potentially less impact compared to the fossil equivalent. So we've avoided 2 tons of CO2 because we're taking plastic away from the energy from waste value chain, and then we're also producing products significantly lower in global warming potential. And this has massive potential for significant carbon savings. And the logos at the bottom are the various LCAs that we've been doing, all independent. So I've talked about some of the best in class on sustainability. So we've talked about LCA. Another study, Consumer Goods, said we were 20% lower. The important thing is that we are significantly lower than the other processes. We know we can do more to improve efficiency. I guess the important part here also is that this material can just come back through our process time and time and time again. With mechanical recycling, as you put material back into a remelt process, over time that material will have less conformational quality, may still have colour from the previous recycling round. We have to get it to a place where that material can keep coming round and round the process. So maybe material goes from mechanical, maybe 2 or 3 loops, and then comes to us for regeneration. In terms of our business model, I've already mentioned that we're building one plant in the UK, one in the United States, and one in the European Union, in Germany. But we also have a license model. This does 2 things for us. First of all, it helps the technology get to scale globally, which means that we're de-risking the technology. The more plants you build, the more you learn, the more you're able to understand different feedstocks, for example. We're working in Japan with Mitsubishi Chemical, and in Korea, LG Chem, and those plants are already in build. And in the States, it's Chevron Phillips. And that also builds us license revenue, which is obviously very helpful in an SME environment. And we work with KBR, who are helping us do that build out. So they're involved with our EPC work with our potential partners abroad, as well as building our own develop and operate plants. So it's a blended business approach that's designed to get to scale. Here's a render of one of the plants. This is the one planned for Germany. You'll see there are 2 hydrothermal reactors. So 100,000 ton nominal output will have 2 50,000 ton reactors delivering to that. And the large shed at the front essentially is to clean the plastic. You know, the waste management infrastructure anywhere is unable to give us the quality of material we need. As a consequence of that, we have to protect our own plant. We want to make sure that the material going into our extruder is 100% target feedstock. And so in there, essentially, it's a MRF. It's a material recycling facility at the front end. And you can see the reactor, by comparison, is relatively small. And again, at the back, you won't be able to see this, but in effect, we are looking to have 1 million tons of pipeline projects in build or operation by 2025, and we've already got over 200,000 tons under licensing with engineering partners KBR in Korea and in Japan. So, you know, by 2025, we should have, you know, well and truly over 1 million tons of capacity either in final build or operation. And that will be the proof, demonstrating that we can do this at scale and change the way we look at our waste plastic. In my very sort of second or third slide, I was talking about how do you join up the ends of a value chain. And it's really difficult because the waste industry doesn't talk to the chemicals industry. So in effect, we've adopted a business model that is not dissimilar to that happens in petchems for refining fuel. So someone described it to me as tolling this morning, which I'm familiar with as a term. But in effect, it's like that. We have to make sure that when things are good, everybody's winning, but when things are bad, nobody's losing. And so we have a guaranteed margin model for our waste plastic supplier and also a guaranteed feedback loop on the off-taker so that we're able to remain in business as we join up, because the risk otherwise would entirely sit with us. So this is important because it allows everyone to have an equal allocation of risk. We're bringing new technologies and also new feedstock to market. But it also makes it highly financeable. If the risks are managed and owned equally in the value chain, that's very good. Demand is not the issue here. There is a massive over demand for this material, but supply is the issue. So getting to supply is key. It also allows for long-term contractual relationships, which is really important. And interesting, the waste industry is very interested in long-term relationships on these scales because they are putting in 20, 25-year agreements with their local waste communities who are providing that material. Certainly helps with credit, and it certainly gives us that certainty on cash flow. So from our point of view, we feel this is the only way in which, and I think this is a challenge for anybody trying to step into the circularity space, is how do you ensure that you don't catch the cold if you're trying to do something unique and different for the first time. Final slide. We at the moment are really faced with a challenge on plastics. We're addicted to it, and it's fine because this material does amazing things in our lives. And even in my time in an NGO, we never demonise the material. So from my point of view, plastic is so embedded in our lives, you couldn't possibly decouple ourselves from it. But we have to be better stewards of that material. To get the recycling back, we have to do things differently. We have to create a value proposition that brings that material back in at the highest possible level of value and also utility. And that's to bring it back as an oil, back in that value chain. In terms of carbon, we're avoiding the wastage of carbon by burning it, which seemed expedient 20 years ago, but now it seems like a really bad idea. But then produce low carbon products. You can't have a circular economy without making a significant contribution to carbon now. Net zero is driving the conversation. It gives, for those in the room who are looking at low carbon investments, you know, this is delivering an outstanding return on investment from an ESG point of view. And we know that the previous speaker talked about actors in the value chain and moving in different positions. We're seeing now, for example, brands looking to get, no, they want to buy the material. That's not the issue. There's no shortage of demand, but how do you secure supply is to go further up the value chain and develop partnerships with the supplier of the material. And that's what we're beginning to see now more of, and there's good examples of that now. And in terms of business growth, well, we're not short of waste plastic, but we've got an opportunity to either work either in partnership with us in the way we're building and developing, or as a licensee of the technology on a global basis. We want to see this technology happen globally. It has to make a difference, particularly where there's very poor waste management infrastructure. And we believe that we've now achieved a circular pricing model with our main off-taker and partner, Dow, and others in the value chain. So, this model should run, and I hopefully will become an exemplar for others in the space. And on that, I will finish. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah. Have time for questions?
Yeah, you got a microphone.
Oh, yeah. We have time for questions. Are there any questions in the room? Yep.
Hi. Water might be an issue in some countries. Can you tell us about the water that... Can you tell us about the water that you use in the reactor? Could it be any type of water? Saline water, seawater can be used?
So this is a question about the supercritical steam, and is it about where the water goes, or what type of water? I think it's a demin water. I'm not the chemist in the room here, but I know it won't just be town water. So no, it'll be very, very clean water. But the aim is that in the first plant we're treating it, and it'll go treating to a very high standard, because it doesn't go to wastewater treatment works. But the ambition is to recycle the water, particularly in water-stressed environments. So part of our sustainability program is looking at water demand, and then that will obviously ensure security of supply. So one of the sites we're looking at, there is a water challenge, so we're now looking at how we can recover at least some of the water back into the process. But the volumes are quite low. I mean, I've been on record as saying even the Wilton plant, I think we're consuming 2 cubes of water an hour. I mean, it's pretty low by comparison, but it depends on how you then cool. So all processes that relate to the water need to be, assessed. What can be recycled, what can't. The cooling water could be recycled. Processed water could be treated and recycled. But yeah, okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm just wondering, in terms of feedstock, obviously your conventional MRF will separate your paper packaging, your PET, etc. How do you ensure that the feedstock for your plant is the feedstock that you really want, the films, the ones that you mentioned? Is there an additional layer of segregation required, or is it a natural flow from the MRF?
Yeah, very good question. So our partner in supplying the Wilton plant, which is the first one, there's Geminor, and they produce refuse-derived fuel. So in effect, we're taking their plastic waste stream away from that fuel feedstock, as it were. There's certainly an opportunity to work more closely with MRFs in other locations, because at every turn they're consuming energy to get to a product, which in effect is going to be burnt. But if we can separate out the films and flexibles, so in the UK we're about to start collecting films and flexibles from the households. If we can get that as a largely clean feedstock, then that in theory could come straight to us. Now our MRF is well and truly able to deal with that stream. Probably around 90% will be target material, but there is no there's no supply of 100% polyolefins. That's the problem. But actually we've embraced that, because even though someone said, oh, we can give you 100% polyolefins, it'll only take one can in there that's going to get through, that suddenly then makes a mess of your process. So from the process insurance point of view, in effect, we will always have a MRF at the front end until such time as the mechanical recycling industry can absolutely guarantee, and we know what's coming in is going to be good enough. So yeah, in terms of quantity and quality, we own that risk. We therefore know what's going into our plant, and it comes at a cost. It's about 16% of our CO2 is due to the MRF at the front end. We'd love to get rid of that, but we'd rather know that than not. There's no market supply for 100% polyolefins, despite the standards that might exist. Simple as that. So no, we own that. Thank you.
Thanks. My question kind of continues from the water. Water is a waste product for you, so you've got to clean that water. And what process do you use to clean that water?
So we have a bespoke reverse osmosis plant, I think, that's on the back of the plant. So because the water is going, even though it's on an industrial site up at Teesside, it's quite interesting that a lot of the Teesside plant itself, or the whole site run by Semcor, does not have a wastewater treatment works dedicated to the wastewater stream. So we looked at various options, including piping, pumping, tankering away, but it seemed more logical from a CO2 point of view and efficiency to do it on a site. So that material is going straight to Tideway. So the Environment Agency environmental permits has required us to hit incredibly stringent standards. So we can come to our stand and I'll find out more about it, but in effect we are having to treat to environmental quality standard discharge. We're not going to sewer. The gentleman there, sorry.
Thank you. You mentioned that your plant in the US with renewables will be a 20% reduction versus virgin, which is really impressive at the same quality. But in the context of net zero, is there still capacity to decarbonize the process, and where would that be?
Yeah. So the way the plant in North Pacific Northwest will look like, and this is our very early part of our LCA, it'll be to be 20% of what is coming out from the ground in terms of brown naphtha. So it's 80% reduction from a CO2 point of view. But I agree with. I think this gets conflated a lot between carbon emissions and energy intensity, and people say they're the same. Of course, they're not. We need to think differently about this. We are putting in also energy efficiency, recycling process gas. I doubt that our process will ever be truly net zero from an operating point of view, but bear in mind, we've also saved 1.8 tonnes of counterfactual, so we're well and truly in credit. Although, and I'm sure many of you would agree, negative numbers when it comes to carbon tend to be treated with some disbelief. So we've taken a very strong view with our partners, University of Warwick, is that we won't count our counterfactual when it comes to product, because it's misleading, but others have done that. So we're saying, no, it's the actual carbon emissions. Of course, every site will be different. And people don't recognise that either. So every site will have to have its own footprint, and that will then be translated into the carbon footprint of the product coming out. But from a contribution for Scope 3 emission reduction for our supply chain, we think that's really exciting.
Thank you.
Hi, are you able to recycle plastics when they're mixed with cellulose? So I'm thinking like cups or kind of wiping materials.
I'll take that question away. It depends on the polymer. I think cellulose is one that is kind of in scope. So just to pick up on that, our target right now and what's gone through the pilot plant in Australia that we've been working with for the last 3.5, 4 years has largely been post-consumer packaging, but mostly polyolefins, because we know that's a relatively simple molecule to deal with. The plant that's in Australia, we're building one also now in the UK, and the ambition is to apply that plant to a whole range of different polymeric feedstocks, whether that be other forms of packaging, rubber, composites, automotive, and so on, even things with flame retardants in, potentially how we might separate those out from the plastic down the value chain. That's very much part of further R&D. So if it's a particular feedstock of interest to you, then let's come and talk to me on the stand and we'll pick it up on from there. But we're not short of different plastic feedstocks. The question is, what do people also put in with those polymers, and can we separate those out? And we're also partnered with the University of Ghent, who are now beginning to look at some of these things with us. So for me, that feels like that's a really important set of questions. Plastic is a mixture of all sorts of stuff. How do you get out what you really want and remove the other stuff that you don't? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff.